I'm in Liverpool for Labour Party conference, which is this year celebrating 75 years since the best decision the Labour Party ever made, introducing the NHS. 13 years of Tory austerity have seen the National Health Service run down into the ground. And if the Labour Party wins power, as it is predicted to do, that change is, of course, going to be reversed. We're going to see less privatisation, more of a nationalised health service, and the NHS back on its feet. All the private companies who've descended on Labour conference this year are just spectators, I guess, because the party that nationalised the health service would never privatise it, right? Right? Can you tell me a bit about why you're here at conference?
I'm here to represent my company and sell stuff.
And are you pleased by the kind of quite, big presence of business at this year's conference? It feels like a very sort of friendly event.
Absolutely. I think everyone's preparing for a general election. It's the run-up to it. So Labour being the opposition and leading in the polls has drawn more business here, more people wanting to engage. And it's created a really friendly and fantastic environment. So well done to whoever's organised conference because it's fantastic.
And do you think that, the sort of scepticism that some people might have, members even might have about the involvement of business at conference is misplaced and actually we should be welcoming business in its presence to conference?
It's a great question. I think the involvement in business is inevitable. There's always got to be sort of that divide between politics, business and, trying to avoid corruption. But there's so many organisations here, so many fantastic ones putting on fringes, that actually hearing the voice of business and hearing the importance of it is going to help inform policy, hopefully for the better.
It doesn't feel like it's a Labour conference anymore. That's been the biggest thing since I've only just arrived this morning. So to come in and find as many business stands as they are, not saying that there isn't room for business within the party, but it doesn't feel like it's the movement that it once was.
Some people have been noticing how many businesses there are this year at conference and suggesting maybe that, there's an absence of members, absence of unions, and that sort of businesses have taken over conference. Would you agree with that?
No. Last year, people were beginning to notice that perhaps Labour did have the capacity and the capability to actually grow. Yeah. And in doing that, and so in the 12 months obviously intervening, suddenly the world and their dog actually want to come to conference. And there's this great waiting list of people.
But is that necessarily a good thing? I mean, for example, private companies in the NHS, they're only involved in the NHS because they can make a profit out of it and extract surplus from it that they can then feed back to their shareholders.
You make a very important point. If you've got such a, how can I describe it, a health sector which is at the moment reminds me of a poor patient. I'll use the same analogy. The patient, unfortunately, is not very well. So you've got to do some emergency things which might involve actually paying for it in particular kinds of ways.
Because, with private health companies?
Well, you might have to in the short term. If you can't get the capacity, you can't say to somebody, well, we'll sort your cancer care out in a year's time.
The situation is that the Tories have driven the National Health Service to the brink of destruction. And in an ideal world, I would have National Health Service only. But when people have been waiting 18 months for a new knee or longer for cancer treatment or for heart treatment, then we need to respond to their medical needs. A guy that I used to work with was waiting for heart surgery. Unfortunately, he died before he could have it. Should I have told him, oh no, my political principles say that you will have to wait and take your chances?
It's in crisis, it's in polycrisis. Labour has to tackle every single element of that. And within that, bringing an ideology to bear which says the one thing we can never do to help the NHS is use the private sector is a form of, it's not just ideology, it's a form of madness.
I have finally won the arguments that just pouring ever-increasing amounts of money, and taxpayers' money we don't have, into a broken system is not going to be delivering good use of taxpayers' money. So I will reach for reform as my primary focus, and investment, investment as a secondary focus.
For a party that claims to love our nationalised health service, there's certainly a lot of private health companies at this year's Labour conference. Behind me, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is speaking at an event called Innovation in the NHS. You wouldn't know it, but the event is sponsored by the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry. So how was the talk just then? Were you excited by it? Were you disappointed by it?
I thought it was a really positive discussion about how we can move forward in the NHS, and also realistic. I think a lot of people want purity within the NHS, but the fact is we've got a very long waiting list. There's a lot of issues with IT, research, innovation, and I think we've just got to be practical in the short term to solve those issues.
Practical in what way? Sort of by relying maybe more on private companies?
I mean, I know Wes Streeting has put forward that suggestion of utilising those healthcare facilities to drive down the waiting lists. And, well, as someone like me who's a long whole career in the NHS, it feels wrong, but I think it's practical, it's realistic, and then we can get back on track with saving our NHS and seeing it how we want it to be.
So you don't feel that like this, running down of the NHS by the Conservatives has been an attempt to create exactly this situation that you're describing, where people then have to say, yes, we need to privatise the NHS because only private companies can fill that gap. Shouldn't we be doing the opposite and saying, they've run it down, we're going to build it back up?
Yeah, 100%. It's totally down to 13 years of Tory austerity, underfunding of the NHS. And as an NHS worker myself, I'm totally against any privatisation of services, but we have seen that under the Conservatives, and I hope we can take some of those services back under control of the NHS. But ultimately, I've been at the sharp end where I've seen the outcomes of people who are waiting multiple years for treatment, and I think we just have to do a short-term fix for a long-term gain.
We've heard a lot today from people saying, look, we've got to be pragmatic. The Tories have ground down the NHS after 13 years and we're just going to have to do a stopgap solution, put the private companies in and then, wait for it to get better. Is that the fix that you think is best?
No, I don't think me personally or our union thinks that. We don't think pragmatism is what people in this country need. This country needs to be turned upside down, whether it's the NHS, whether it's the cost of living crisis, the infrastructure, public services, everything is on its knees in this country, and I don't think tinkering at the edges or pragmatism works for the people of this country. It hasn't gone unnoticed that there's some big companies here, some big CEOs, and I think it has to be said that they are not paying their money to be here to improve workers' rights or to improve the lot for the people that work for them. They're paying their money to put pressure on the Labour to not do that. And I suppose it's our job as the founders of the Labour Party to constantly remind them of that. I think what we're seeing here is more of a processional event where everyone's just like, we're the government in waiting, don't make any mistakes, let the Tories make the mistakes, let's say nothing, let's commit to nothing, let's do nothing, and hope to sort of slip their way into number 10. What we're saying is let's smash the door down. Let's come in with a set of radical policies. Let's give people hope. Let's tell people we will fix the infrastructure. Let's tell people we want a publicly owned NHS. Let's tell people we're going to take key infrastructure services back into public hands. Because I actually think if we did that, it would inspire people rather than basically people not voting for Labour but preparing to vote against the Tories, which I think is where they are at the minute.
But conference, do not doubt the hard road either. Because if all we do is place the NHS on a pedestal, then I'm afraid it will remain on life support. I know some people don't like the word reform, but I tell you now, there's no other option. A reforming state, not a checkbook state.
I'm here outside the conference hall, which is where members not only listen to politicians make speeches, they also vote on motions that they hope will make it into the next party manifesto. Two motions that won't be heard this year are on the NHS and whether it should be renationalised. And that's because the Labour leadership has decided that Labour members shouldn't be able to debate this issue at conference.
So basically what we're seeing is the leadership essentially running scared. What they've done is absolutely unprecedented, where the Starmer-led NEC has essentially overruled the Conference Arrangements Committee, as I said, in an unprecedented move in order to basically siphon off the motions that they know are popular with the trade unions and with the members, which is about ending privatisation in the NHS and properly funding it. So they basically siphoned off all of those, and all of the ones that are really light on policy essentially have gone into another composite, which is the one that will now be debated.
Right. And would you describe Wes's vision for the NHS as light on policy?
Yeah, I mean, he has no commitment to ending privatisation of the NHS, and in fact, it looks like he has plans to increase private sector use of the NHS, essentially. We have to remember that within the health system, we are dealing with literally some of the most powerful lobbyists in the world here. This is what that is about. It is about profit, it isn't about people, and as long as we are in a system that prioritises people's health for profit, it's never going to work for the service user. So it's hugely worrying. And yeah, it's obviously completely the wrong direction.
It seems very much this year like the party conference has kind of shifted in quite a corporate direction. I wonder how that makes you feel and what that signals to you about the direction that Labour is going in vis-a-vis business, and specifically vis-a-vis businesses and private interests in the NHS.
Yeah. So I think it's politically very worrying. I also think that it's strategically a disaster, frankly, for Labour. They are likely to take power next year. That means they're going to be in charge of the NHS. They're going to be responsible for it. They are not offering anything close to the kinds of solutions that we actually need to dig the NHS out of the crisis it's in. We've got 7.7 million people on the waiting list. That's only going up. We've got over 130,000 full-time vacancies in NHS England. We've got hundreds of patients who are literally dying each week needlessly because of delays to emergency care. It's a mess, and they're about to inherit it. And leaning on the private sector is not going to be the solutions to our problems, despite what Wes Streeting might say, despite what Labour might say. The reality is there needs to be new funds generated by taxing the rich and by taxing corporations to channel into public services that are broken. We have been underspending on the NHS to the tune of 40 billion a year in comparison to like similar European countries. So like saying we're not going to spend any money and saying the private sector will solve all our problems, it's absolutely going to fail, and they need to reckon with that. It's not the case that more money going to the private sector is great for the NHS. It's literally the opposite of that, because it's diverting funds away. A private bed is like so much more expensive than like funding the bed in the NHS, that the NHS model has been proven to be, as a model, the best, the most effective, including the most cost-effective way of delivering public healthcare. Like that is just a fact. Yeah. But it's the fact that it's had over 13 years of cuts, of underfunding, of privatisation, and siphoning funds away to private healthcare companies. Like in the wake of the pandemic, I think it was £500 million was spent by the government on private service provision to ease the backlog, and less patients were seen. So it's literally like we're funneling hundreds of millions, even billions away to private companies, and it's not getting better for patients. Yeah. It's literally getting worse.
The NHS it's like personal to people, isn't it? You know what I mean? Going back like decades. But like my own personal thing with the NHS, I lost my son. He's stillborn, and some of the nurses come to the funeral. So I don't think you get that with private funding and private, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's that personal touch that they offer. Yeah.
I came from the US, and I've been in the insurance-ruled medical system. And I think what that does to people who can't afford to go private is there's so many people that have died because of that. And I would hate to see it turned into the same thing.
Does the presence of some of the same private healthcare companies that operate in the US, such as Roche, for example, who are represented here at conference, how does their presence at Labour conference make you feel?
I think I'm both worried because I'm worried about the influence that they might have on a government in waiting that's trying to fix things that they haven't had control of. And I think that's the thing. You have to remember making a deal with the devil. You know, you have to be aware that profits are the thing. Money talks. And I would hate for all of the hard goodwill works to get lost in a corporate dog-eat-dog fight. Why we have had so much problem, I think, in the NHS, from my perspective, is that we're focusing on the wrong things. Very often you get managers managing, but they're not healthcare managers, they're just managers, high-priced managers who have no idea what the aims of the organization are. Having big business has its place, like to pay for a conference, when you don't have the masses and masses of donors with a lot of money funneling stuff in. But you've got to keep an eye on how far you're willing to allow them to put their hooks in you. Nobody gives you something for nothing.
One group of people that definitely wants to get its voice heard are consultancies. Between 2021 and 2022, NHS England quadrupled its budget for outsourced consultancy work to £83 million. Those consultancies are certainly hoping an incoming Labour government would continue that spending. I'm here to try and have a word with a certain Nicholas Fox. He works for KPMG. So can you tell us a bit about who you are and why you're here at the conference?
I'm Nicholas Fox. I'm a partner in KPMG. I lead our government practice, and I'm here because I want to engage with how we're going to transform public services for the future.
KPMG provides consultancy services to the government, is that right? Tell us a little bit about the work KPMG does with government.
We provide a whole range of services across all industries in the UK, all sectors in the UK, up and down the country, including with the government.
So some people will point to consultancies and say there's a risk of a conflict of interest, say, when a consultancy like KPMG has two clients, in this case, let's say some in the private sector and some in the public sector, and so, for example, might want to recommend some of its own clients to government. Is that something that you kind of accept or acknowledge, or do you think that's not a concern people should have?
No, I think we've got some very strong processes and policies in place to make sure that we avoid that. At KPMG, acting with integrity is one of our core values, and we make sure that that kind of conflict never occurs. We wouldn't accept work if that was going to be in a position we're in.
I'm just aware that in 2021 you got fined £13 million for having a conflict of interest with two of your clients. Is that not the case? Or no? Okay. You get the sense, speaking to people at Labour conference, this sense of resignation and defeatism and sort of, acceptance that we're just going to have to rely more and more on the private sector as our NHS crumbles underneath our feet. Like, do you personally feel like that is an inevitability, or do you see a different way forward?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's inevitable. I think that there's a big struggle ahead, but I think it's a struggle that we've got to tackle head on. There absolutely are success stories like amongst our movement of like patients and health workers like organising against increasing corporate control within our health system, and I think it's going to be a very interesting one for the Labour government when, if they do kind of follow through with the policies that they're saying, I think they should absolutely expect quite a tidal wave of resistance from both patients and workers, because as we said, the crisis is only going to get worse. Patients are going to get more and more angry, more and more frustrated, and also I don't think that the health workers are going to stop going on strike under Labour as well. So I think there's lots of avenues for action and organising, and I think the NHS is obviously just such a huge issue in this country. It's an issue that literally affects all of us in one way or another. So I don't think they can't avoid that basically, and they can't dodge that. And I think there absolutely are avenues for like forcing concessions for sure.